Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Since we're here to talk to you today about intentional community, we're doing so in community. I'm Hannah Gillespie, and this is Helen. We are excited to talk to you today about the growing number of young adult intentional Catholic communities rising across this country. In particular, we will share about our own community, the Lisieux House in Seattle, and in general, how these communities promote the dignity of the human person by cultivating an environment where each person is seen, known, and loved, and creating the physical and spiritual space for healing through prayer and vulnerability. First, what distinguishes an intentional Catholic community? How is intentional community different than just a group of Catholic friends? In my own life, I've had friendships form around different pillars of commonality. At Notre Dame, for example, some of these friendships were formed around being from the same dorm as Guerrilla West. Some of these friendships were formed with others in the same major or people in the same club or activity. In intentional Catholic communities, friendship is formed in and through and around Christ. He is the intended center and pillar of those friendships. In this presentation, we are also specifying intentional communities as young Catholic adults living in the same physical home and adhering to certain requirements for prayer and community life. All right, our own community, the Lisieux House, shown here, is a group of 6 women living in a converted convent in Seattle. The house was founded in 2014. Between 5 and 8 women live at Lisieux House at the same time, going to school or working normal jobs in the city, ranging from mechanical engineering to food photography to tax accounting. Whenever a new woman moves into Lisieux House, she makes a commitment to both private and communal prayer. This includes personal time in our chapel before the Blessed Sacrament, as well as night prayer Monday through Thursday, weekly rosary, and annual retreats. She also makes a commitment to the community through weekly house dinners and daily chores. For the majority of young adults today, the idea of living in an old convent and committing to a set of religious practices seems odd, intense, outdated. We live in a world becoming increasingly more secular, increasingly more individualistic, with an unprecedented 39% of Americans aged 18 through 29 identifying as religious nuns, being religiously unaffiliated. At the same time, the modern young adult experience is also characterized by decreased feelings of belonging. Young adults reported feeling lonely or isolated more than twice the number of days as other adults, despite paradoxically having a larger social network. We see then, even in the midst of this growing secularization, there's also growing a deep-seated desire for authentic community. We believe Lisieux House and similar communities are true gifts from God, brought to each member at the right time and right place. Here, for example, is Helen's story of how she was trying to live in intentional community at Lisieux House.
Thanks, Hannah. I am the food photographer that she mentioned in the presentation, and I would like some photos to be shown, so please just wait a moment as I try to figure this out. Okay, great. Like Hannah, my college experience was really similar in that I also had many friendships centered around pillars of commonality. After my time at UCLA, what I see now as this unspoken desire for belonging and a sharing of life led me to being involved with various communities around Los Angeles, the Chinese and Korean Catholic young adult communities, namely. And I moved to Seattle 3 years ago, and this yearning was still in my heart. So this led me again to another community called L'Arche. And L'Arche is a network of homes. It's a community of people with and without intellectual disabilities living together in the same home in a simple but intentional way. It was here that I came to know in a very clear way that I had a desire for intentional community. In L'Arche, I saw how every day the members chose to love the other for the other. I wanted to experience that extraordinary love for myself, to experience being the giver and the recipient of that love. Aren't they lovely? At Lisieux House, we live this reality of community life revealing the dignity of the other, especially through the example of our patron saint, Saint Therese of Lisieux. We just want to share a small section from the story of a soul, Saint Therese's autobiography. She writes, and you can follow along. There is in the community a sister who has the faculty of displeasing me in everything. In her ways, her words, her character, everything seems very disagreeable to me. And still she is a holy religious who must be very pleasing to God. Not wishing to give in to the natural antipathy I was experiencing, I told myself that charity must not consist in feelings but in works. Then I set myself to doing for this sister what I would do for the person I loved most. Each time I met her, I prayed to God for her, offering him all her virtues and merits. I felt this was pleasing to Jesus, for there is no artist who doesn't love to receive praise for his works. And Jesus, the artist of souls, is happy when we don't stop at the exterior, but penetrating into the inner sanctuary where he chooses to dwell, we admire its beauty. In living together our day-to-day lives, we're invited over and over again, like Saint Therese, to not stop at the exterior, but to enter into that place where the Lord dwells, to see Christ in our sisters, to say yes when Jesus asks, will you try to find me in her also? This is not to say we're naturally drawn to one another, nor is our community free of conflict. We all come with our unique stories and perspectives, but recognize that what we're here for is greater than ourselves, and that each person in our community, whether it's been revealed to us or not, is needed, important, and essential. A few years ago, we were blessed to have Father Jacques-Philippe come to Lisieux House to celebrate Mass for our community. Many of us have been deeply impacted by him and his works. His words from his book, Interior Freedom, remains imprinted in our hearts. Love is also a decision. Sometimes it comes spontaneously, but very often loving people will mean choosing to love them. Otherwise, love would be no more than emotion, even selfishness, and not something that engages our freedom. We may not get along with every member of our community all the time, but that's not really the point. We are brought together by our shared commitment to the Christ and to the community that will allow us to live that commitment to the fullest for this season of life. In our house, we're very careful not to enter into a spirit of exclusivity. While individual friendships naturally form as a result of community life, full disclosure, Hannah is my friend and my bridesmaid when I get married. We want to be sure that our relationships are always inviting and open. If we exclude any members in our community, we ultimately harm ourselves in this goal of growing in virtue and holiness. Every person is necessary because we believe every person has been invited by God to the community, and through this we recognize again the importance and worth of each member. What attracts us to the other is exactly what Saint Therese concluded about her own sister. What attracted me was Jesus hidden in the depths of her soul. Community is a gift. When we move into Lisieux House, we have the joy of discovering how we relate to people we would not have necessarily chosen to live with. We allow the Lord to surprise us as he does. We cannot grasp at community, we can only receive in childlike trust. When we pour ourselves into our community, there's an even greater outpour of grace. In its very structure, the way of love and holiness becomes a daily, concrete reality, not an esoteric notion. We experience the deep consolation of a knowing that comes from a sister who hears the day's sorrows and challenges, like a difficult client meeting at work. We delight in the small joys of a sister who comes home, excited to share a new walking route in the neighborhood, as Hannah did a few weeks ago. It is finally a place of rest and restoration in a culture very much at odds with who we're called to be.
As Helen alluded to, there are many moments of joy in community. Yet in this world we live in, we experience suffering. And community life also provides a space to acknowledge and sit with this reality as well. The suffering can be relatively small. For example, I often experience minor frustration when my housemate leaves the dishes in the sink. Suffering can touch us in deeper ways as well. The very day before I moved to Seattle to move into the Lisieux House, I received a call from one of our soon-to-be housemates. She told me sobering news. The father of one of our other housemates had just passed away in an accident. The news shocked me and made my transition to Seattle less about the now suddenly superficial details of my move, and more about learning to simply be in the presence of my housemate who had just suffered the loss of her father. This call to show unanticipated empathy is one danger of community. This drawing out of myself and my own plans, this invitation to show compassion, even when I don't necessarily feel like it, this radical involvement in the sufferings of another, these I quickly realized are the risks I take by choosing to live in intentional community. Yet, perhaps the greatest suffering we face in community is coming face to face with our own woundedness. To let ourselves be fully seen by others in our community is to let the humanity of our story be known. This includes discovering more clearly one's areas of weakness. This also includes coming to terms with trauma from one's past, small or large, from subtle lies we have come into agreement with over the years, to childhoods in broken families, to wounds of rejection, abandonment, even addiction, leading to feelings of shame. In Lisieux House, every Tuesday, we have a community dinner where we share the highs and lows of our week. These dinners will last a solid 2 hours. These are not superficial highs or lows. This is our weekly practice in vulnerability. Following dishes and night prayer, we pray our weekly rosary in the chapel, offering up those very same struggles we just shared with each other together in prayer to the Lord. Ultimately, our greatest practice in vulnerability is in private prayer, letting ourselves be fully seen and embraced by Jesus himself in all our need and weakness. While our house commitment is to 30 minutes of personal prayer a day, many women will prioritize a full holy hour. When I was elected house leader this past October, after Helen serving as house leader, I was praying in the chapel for Lisieux House and for each woman in the house, and I felt like the Lord was reminding me that prayer is the heartbeat of Lisieux House. Prayer unveils our eyes to the Lord's presence in our lives. Before I moved into Lisieux House, prayer to me was still in many ways a formal exercise, and God was very good, if a little abstract and absent in my day-to-day life. It was in Lisieux House that I truly learned how to pray, in particular to pray Ignatian contemplation, through a 10-week program in the spiritual exercises I did along with Helen. Through this practice of daily prayer, daily holy hours, I began to see more clearly how God provides for my needs in the concrete realities of everyday life. When I try to love my community member in Lisieux House with the same love Christ has for her, I discover what Sister Miriam James means when she says, "You can accompany only as far as you've gone yourself." For me then, I actually desire healing, not just for my own sake, but to really address the wounds that are currently limiting me from loving my community member in the way that I'm called to do. We believe Lisieux House has a special charism of healing. Our wounds are met in the house with deep gentleness and mercy, with support from our community members, and also through counselors and spiritual directors. At its heart, though, it is the Lord who does the work of healing. Pope Benedict XVI explains, Jesus' gaze, the touch of his heart, heals us, enabling us to become truly ourselves and thus totally of God. In my own story, since moving into Lisieux House a year and a half ago, I've come into conflict multiple times with my own age-old tendency towards unhealthy independence, self-reliance. Being unwilling to ask others for help, I still desired that help, and sometimes experienced resentment when that need wasn't met. Through the support of some of my housemates, as well as my spiritual director, I learned the goodness of expressing my need, which gave my housemates an opportunity to love me and gave me permission to receive that love. Here too, Helen will share about her own experience of healing in community at Lisieux House.
I recall with great gratitude the many conversations I had with the former house leader, Catherine, in the middle, tall, lovely lady with the blonde hair, who has since gone on to become a missionary with the Society of Our Lady of the Most Holy Trinity. Catherine was one of the funniest, gentlest, and joyful people I'd ever met, but she also carried heavy trauma that she was courageously facing and bringing to the Lord when our paths crossed at Lisieux House. As she shared with me the deepest parts of our heart, I found myself sharing mine also. And she gently asked me one day if I had ever considered going to therapy. The question took me by surprise. I did not grow up around anyone who had gone to counseling, and while I recognize its value, I never felt that it was something I needed. Then a difficult situation with my family led me to ask Catherine for the contact information of a local Catholic therapist. After some time, I found myself coming face to face with my childhood trauma. For over a decade, I'd come to believe that the lie that I could manage my trauma well, when in fact what I truly needed and what the Lord desired for me was healing, not management. With the help of my therapist and my spiritual director, I came to see more clearly my wound of fatherlessness and the sin of unholy self-reliance. My journey of healing is one that is still ongoing, and it has been the greatest gift to journey in community. I have been seen in my brokenness, and more importantly, I have been loved again and again, wounded as I am. It has led me to experience a greater freedom in discerning the unique vocation the Lord has planted in my heart. Which leads us to say, during this period of young adulthood, we believe it's incredibly important, if not necessary, to have a community support us as we discern our future vocations. Firstly, vocations cannot be discerned in isolation because the point of vocation is to bear fruit for others. An important part of the discernment process itself is to look at the fruit that comes forth and see if it is good. Other people are necessary in this process precisely so we can give of ourselves through our vocation. Secondly, we need community, friends, and spiritual directors who ask about our greatest desires. Like the blind beggar who was asked by our Lord, "What do you want me to do for you?" We too must come face to face with that question. So often our deepest desires are unveiled by another. Lastly, we often see that the needs of our vocation are planted when we find ourselves attracted to the beauty and goodness that we see in the life of another. When we witness the Christ-like joy of a vocation being fully discerned and lived out, we find ourselves also desiring that joy and the source of that joy. After their time at Lisieux House has come to an end, women in our community take their next steps in living out the unique vocation they have been called to, starting faithful families of their own, preparing for religious life, pursuing graduate schooling, and becoming missionaries in the poorest parts of the country. No one vocation is the same, and each vocation is the beautiful fruit of the heart's preparation done in and through community. Simply to conclude, community reveals the dignity of the other. It is intentional, and it is a gift that is received. In our community, we've identified that there is a journey of suffering, vulnerability, and healing that allows for community members to be more fully prepared for the next steps in their lives. We also see across America the desire for community is alive and growing. In 2021, the Lisieux House received 10 applications for the house, nearly 4 times the normal amount. Similar Catholic communities are present in cities like San Francisco, pictured here, called Prairie East, Los Angeles, New Orleans, New York, Pittsburgh, and 2 homes here in South Bend. These homes of prayer and community are attractive to young people. They gather a community of people that likewise affirm the most fundamental truths of human beauty, dignity, and worth. Finally, they provide a school for young Catholics to be retaught and reminded of the dignity of each and every person we encounter. As St. Therese did, we strive to love the other before us by seeing Jesus hidden in the depths of her soul. For ultimately, it is He that brought that soul face to face with ours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ladies. All those presentations were so beautiful. We have a little bit of time for questions, so you can direct your questions to any of the panelists, all of them together if you like. So does anyone have any questions?
Should I stand up?
Sure.
Makes sense. My name is Ambrose. Thank you to all of you for your presentation. I had a question for Hannah and Helen. This might sound boring to some people. It's interesting to me. I had questions about the governance of the house. So people are gathered together with an intention, how you actually implement that. That has to happen with people making decisions. What stays the same? What do you guys get to decide? And how do you do it?
Testing is the sound.
Yeah.
It works.
Great. Yeah, thanks Ambrose for your question. So when the house was established in 2014, it was based off some models that had already been established in Pittsburgh. And each of these homes, at least the ones we've spoken with, have a house constitution that lays out the communal and prayer requirements. And then I would say when women enter the home, they enter in with the intention and the full knowledge and the desire to follow those requirements. It's not just a set of rules, but really a way to guide our lives to build up the community and to build up our prayer lives. If there needs to be any, I guess I would say, enforcement of those, it's more so in a conversation, especially from both Helen and I. Helen was house leader, I'm currently house leader. So it would be my responsibility to go and speak with one of the women if there's any sort of issue or conflict with that. We also have a house spiritual director that comes over and provides spiritual guidance and also just communal guidance. He'll be the one that will lead our retreats. So if there are any other higher questions around that, we can refer to him.
And he's a priest.
He is. He's a local priest in the Archdiocese of Seattle. His name is Father Colin Parrish.
Thank you for each of your presentation. I have questions for Ines.
Okay.
Do you have any reflections as a religion reporter on how to bring these stories of our Christian brothers and sisters in India, Nigeria, Pakistan, to an American audience, where the stories that we talk about as American Catholics are how Pope Francis looks at President Biden or looks at President Trump? How do we bring those stories?
Well, I mean, it's actually part of my job. So, you know, if I might say, just those who can support Crux, because it's what I love to do the most. Is not actually stop the boat through the world, but get to meet these people and tell their stories. And I've had the, you know, it's being done. The problem is right now it's expensive to do it, because when you actually want to meet these people who've suffered as much as they have suffered, you can't just expect to have a Skype conversation with them, because most of these people don't know how to read it right, much less how to open a computer and connect to Skype. Other than that, I mean, there are a lot of people out there who are trying to do it. Get Religion is a really interesting, I think, aggregator that is trying to share the stories of those of us who are trying to tell the stories of suffering. It's important that it's being done, so thank you for asking that question. And I think something key is for people to actually read them when journalists we go through the trouble of writing at them and trying to share them as much as possible. And also, you know, something I like to do whenever I'm asked about political questions, or let's bring down the Catholic Church to just a political conversation of, as you said, Biden, Trump, and communion or not. And all of that is very important and has to be known, but it also has to be done, I think, within the context of the actual universal church. And these people are, who are not the majority of Catholics in the world. It's not us who have the amazing opportunity of being here today, but those who are there, you know, in Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, India, Nigeria, well, actually most of Africa, most of Asia, afraid of going to Mass on Sunday because odds are they might get killed, especially on the big holidays, just Easter or Christmas. Thank you.
My question's for Hannah and Helen. But my name's Matthew Helge. I'm from Iowa. My question is, do you see similar houses for men, for males, and how do they compare? How are they similar or different to your house?
Yeah, great question. We actually have a brother house in Seattle as well. It's called the Frazzati House, built very similarly, and our founders actually were in communication when the men's house was founded. It was founded after ours. I would say that, yeah, I think there is that shared fraternity, that commonality in that. They also have requirements for prayer and community life. They also have community dinners. They pray morning prayer together as part of their liturgy of the hours. But I do think that there is a discernment that happens when a group of people come together about what is the charism of their community and what is the purpose of their coming together. I mean, yes, Christ, but in maybe perhaps in the spirituality of it. Our house is Carmelite in its spirituality. Our patron Saint Mason Tress. And the Frazzati men are named after Blessed Pure Giorgio Frazzati because that's their patron and that's kind of the spirituality with which we live. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Hannah.
Just one quick other thing to add is that our house is very blessed to have the Blessed Sacrament in a chapel in the house. The Frazzati house in Seattle does not have the Blessed Sacrament, and so there's a little bit of a difference there too. We have requirements for having the Blessed Sacrament in the house, Mass at least once a month, things like that they don't have.
Gentleman in the back.
Hi, my name's Will. Thanks for your presentations. I thought it was interesting that we've kind of heard from examples of communities from across the spectrum, from completely distorted ones like Connemall to really ideal ones like it sounds like what you guys have at the Lisieux House. So I was interested in how we can use shared place and shared people as a starting point to sort of move communities in the direction of shared values or sort of more positive shared components in addition to just having sort of the same places people.
I had your name.
Yeah, thanks so much for the question. I think, yeah, it's a good one. So I think love of place is a good starting point insofar as is sort of the Catholic tradition holds love sort of inherently inclines to the good. So insofar as we love a place, this can sort of lead us towards these, I think, ultimately higher kind of normative ideals that can create communities like the intentional communities that we've described here. So yeah, so maybe focusing on love of place is sort of a good kind of midpoint between the total deterioration of communities that we saw with one presentation and sort of the ideal that that was presented at the Lisieux House. Oh, I just didn't know if any of you had anything to add to that point.
I'll take one more question if there's one more.
My name's Liza, I'm from Iowa. I had a question for Ellie. I was wondering if you yourself were from a small town and how that related to your paper.
Yeah, so I am from a small town, and yeah, in some ways, I kind of think this about all academic work in some way, that I think all academic work is in some form autobiographical. So mine definitely is. Yeah, so I grew up in a small town, and it was within Troup County in Georgia. We all called it Trap County because everyone felt sort of trapped and wanted to escape and move on to elsewhere. And so, yeah, so I kind of grew up with the hope of escaping Trap County, and I suppose I did, but after leaving there, I sort of realized among the many vices that I saw growing up, that there are also a lot of virtues there that I appreciated, that I tried to, I guess, lay out in a paper that were more present in sort of the concrete sort of encounter with others in a local community that I didn't necessarily find in the Northeast where I ended up. So, yeah, so I think that's not to say that sort of cities or places that aren't in small town Georgia or Kentucky sort of can't realize these ideals, but it's just to say that we shouldn't give up on small towns in the ways that many people think we should.
Thank you again, ladies. Give a round of applause.